Just want to say thank you very much for all of you for coming out tonight. Thank you to Monsignor McCulkin, Monsignor Murray, Father Graby, and to all my brother priests for being here to worship with us tonight. For those of you that haven't been here since Sunday, our focus has been on really this Eucharistic revival. What are we reviving within our hearts? Our devotion to the Eucharist. Sunday, we talked about how the sacrifice that God desires, is truly one of our own hearts. And the difference between Abram's sacrifice at the very beginning compared to what the Israelites eventually sacrificed was the animals that Abram sacrificed came from his need, while the Israelites were offering merely bought commodities to appease God. Last night, we focused how the Eucharist is, through the Holy Spirit, an act of remembrance, right? And when we remember our lives, when we remember in our hearts all of our joys, all of our happiness, all of our loves, all of our pain, and all of our suffering, and we remember that Christ draws near to us, the Eucharist becomes the link between our life and his life. God's grace dwelling within us, within our hearts, and us dwelling within God the Father. And tonight, I want to focus on what we do with that grace, how we take this to the world, how we increase our devotion and our belief in the most holy body and blood of our Lord Jesus Christ. There's a funny story in the Auletta family history. Most of you know that I have two younger sisters, Allison and Mary. Mary is 6 years younger, and Allison is 2. Well, one night at the dinner table, Mary was about 3 years old, and a big thing for us in our household was dessert. Loved dessert. When it came to dessert time, we had a variety of things we could choose from, and we all went through phases. For me, I always loved chocolate ice cream and cake in some way. My sister Allison, vanilla ice cream was her thing. And when Mary was 3 years old, she just absolutely loved having like a little bowl of grapes. And so one night we're getting all of our, desserts situated, and my dad goes into the living room and he turns on EWTN. And there's Mother Angelica with all of her sisters, and they're praying the rosary together, and it was, just a typical night in the Auletta household. And Mary, she's sitting there eating, and all of a sudden she goes, "Oh!" And we all stopped. And we looked at her and we thought that something happened. And she goes, "Mmm." And she had this big revelation, this aha moment. I said, "Mary, what's going on?" And she just goes, "That's me." She points at the TV. And my mom looks at her and says, "What are you talking about?" She goes, "That's me, Mary, full of grapes." And Mary full of grapes. And so we've always busted her chops over that, "Hey, grapes, how you doing, grapes? Good to see you." We haven't let her live that down. And during the rosary, when we prayed it as a family, every once in a while I'd kind of just look up at her, and she just, as the years passed, would just shake her head, But here's the thing, when we receive the Eucharist, we're not filled with grapes, we're filled with grace. We're filled with grace, right? Jesus' very life dwells within us, and our hearts dwell within his, as the gospel says tonight. His grace is infused within us, and it leads us into greater opportunities to practice virtue, to grow in our faith, to grow in hope, to grow in love, temperance, prudence, fortitude, courage. He gives us the strength that we need to pursue after him and to survive in the midst of this crazy world that is offering ideology after ideology that is so confusing. It is so devastating, and our identities are trying to be shaken. But Him, He is our identity as beloved children of God the Father, who designed us, who knows us. He knows all of our happiness, all of our joys, all of our pains, and all of our struggles, and He draws close to us. So, what do we do with that information? I think it's really important that we focus on our disposition to receiving the Eucharist at Mass, right? There's a couple of things that we can do. We don't want to overwhelm you with all the theology and stuff, but here's 3 practical points. Number 1, how we attend confession. Number 2, how our reverence is towards the Eucharist physically, when we literally approach the altar. How are our hearts prepared to receive him? And number 3, how do we bring him out into this world? Confession. Confession is so important in our lives. You know why? Because when we go into the confessional and we kneel down in front of the priest, and every priest here, we all have to do this too, right? We have to approach another, kneel down or sit face to face, whichever your preference is, and we have to become vulnerable. We have to express the ways that we failed and the ways that we've sinned. And it's not easy. It hurts. And there's a sense of shame and guilt with it. And the enemy wants to poke you into so much shame and so much guilt that you just want to avoid confession. But when we become vulnerable before God our Father, it puts us in the disposition to fully give him our hearts, and it creates the space within us for him to work, right? We have to make open, honest, and good confessions frequently. I tell people once a month, we have to be in the confessional at least. And then also on the conversely, you don't want to be going more than once a week, because that leads to a sense of really scrupulosity, right? The sense that I have to be the one to save myself. No, the Lord's taking care of you, but once a month is a good, healthy practice to make sure that we're being held accountable before God. The Israelites in the Old Testament, they had this ritual before they went to the temple to offer worship to God, where they would immerse themselves in this, what's called a mikvah, right? It was a ritual bath where they would wash themselves to attain what was called ritual purity, right? This ritual purity is not a purity in the sense of degree, or like I have to be better than I am, but more so the sense that we've crossed the line and we need to be reconciled to God the Father. So this confession, really, every time we go to confession, we are becoming ritually clean. We are being washed anew, being made perfect the way God sees us, until we screw up again, and then we go back to confession, But this disposition that we need to have this humility, so that when we remember Christ's sacrifice at the Last Supper during the Mass, when we remember our lives, all of our joys, loves, pains and struggles, and we approach the Eucharist, we have it within our hearts to say, Lord, I am ready to receive you, and I am sorry for the way that I failed. The second point, how do we receive the Eucharist? This is really important. I think every priest here can tell you that we've seen very, very different people come up and how they approach their reception of the Most Holy Eucharist. One of my brother priests, back when we were in seminary, he gave me a bit of advice that changed my life. We were on the spiritual year, the first year of seminary, when it's basically the year of learning how to pray, and my entire life I had received the Eucharist in the hands, very reverently, the way that I was taught. You have one hand down, you make a little throne for God. That's what, they all taught us. And he looked at me, and I was the only one out of the 9 of us that was receiving in the hands. And he said, hey, why don't you try receiving on the tongue? I said, well, that's uncomfortable. That's bizarre. I don't do that. He goes, just see what happens. Try it out. You might grow in your devotion. And that one suggestion literally changed my entire devotion to the Eucharist. To receive him in that way with such almost embarrassment at first, I felt uncomfortable, I felt awkward, but it grew into this abandonment to his will. And it was really that simple act that helped me persevere through seminary, that I've noticed a genuine growth in my devotion to the Eucharist. So I'm not telling you all have to do that. The Church clearly gives you the option is now whether to receive in the hands or on the tongue, but I give you the same suggestion as my confrere did to me, that if you choose to receive on the tongue, it could change your life. It could change your devotion to the Eucharist, and you might as well try it out. I see people come up, and sometimes they have their hands like this, where there's a clear gap in the middle of their hands, and it's like, You don't know what to do there. You don't want Jesus falling right through the center. So very simply, one hand underneath, hand on top, throne for God, or the bottom of your tongue on the top of your bottom lip. That's it, right? Be very conscious of that. Be very reverent in how you do that, because what we're doing is when we approach this altar, we are receiving his heart. We are receiving our hearts through him. We are acknowledging that all of our family, all of our friends, all of our ancestors who have gone before us approached the same bread with the same devotion. And in many ways, we are receiving the hearts of all of our family, friends, ancestors, and saints of old. We have to have this constant reverence for what is taking place and how it's changing our lives. The third and final point is, how do we then take what we received, and bring it out to this really fallen world, right? Very often I am asked in the parish, like, Father, I'm so sorry, for bothering you, but, I just want you to pray for my family. My children have fallen away from the faith, and it's stressing me out. It's causing me a lot of anxiety. When we grow in our own devotion to the Eucharist, it changes how other people view us for the better, right? The grace that God fills us with, the more we continually work on that, spills over from our own hearts and into the life of others. I guarantee you, the way that your children, your grandchildren, and people see how much this means to you will affect them. It might not be immediately, it might not be tomorrow as much as we would all like, right? But it will change them. So it's very simple. If you want to change the life of others, you have to change your own life, our own lives, my own life as well, all of us. And we do that through a simple reverence to the Holy Eucharist, acknowledging that Christ's sacrifice on the cross, the perfect offering to God the Father, redeemed us. It gives us hope. It gives us joy, it gives us peace, and we are presented with that same sacrifice every time we come and celebrate the Mass or the liturgy together as a community of believers. I want to thank you all so much for welcoming me back to this parish family, the parish that I served as a deacon, and I ask you to please continue to pray for me as I pray for all of you. God bless you.